A Glass Prince. Once upon a time there was a kingdom with a very ambitious king and a very ambitious queen, but a very responsible queen, and they had a baby, a young boy, a prince, who was very wise, not as ambitious, but very sensitive, like an artist or a wizard, and very beautiful. One day, into the court came a citizen who had been away from the kingdom for many, many years, and he came back and he said to the king, "O king, I have found amazing treasure. I have found spice and gold, amazing expensive clothings and wild plants that are exotic, and some you can eat and some have medicinal purposes, and all of these things are in a kingdom that is a long way from here, but not impossible for us to go to. And if we go, we may be able to either negotiate or bring by force these treasures for ourselves." And the king thought that this would be a good idea. The kingdom was not a wealthy kingdom, it wasn't so badly off, but they could certainly use a boost, seeing as their neighbors were very competitive. And so the king said, "Let us get a great party going and take some of our armed forces and our merchants and let us go to this kingdom and recover these treasures." And he mounted this great force, and they rode out of the city. And he bade the queen look after the kingdom while he was away. And she did. And the king was away for more than a year, more than 2 years, more than 5 years. He was away for a long, long time. In fact, he was away so long, we will not see his return in this story. And all the while he was away, the queen ran the kingdom, and she looked after all the affairs. And she did it quite well, for she was very strong-willed, very smart. And she ruled with compassion as well. She was a very good queen. But running an entire nation, it takes a lot of time. And the prince, the very smart, very imaginative, and very sensitive prince, grew up without his father, the king, and for all practical purposes, without his mother, the queen, whom he loved very, very dearly and with all his heart. And every year he grew older, a strange thing happened. From the age of 10 on, this prince, who had been so sensitive he could hear the fairies in the forest and tell which fairy was flying closest to the palace for hearing the beating of their wings. This prince with so much sensitivity, seeing and chasing after his mother, who would always tell him, "Not now, not now, I have to do this, I have to sign these papers, I have to see this ambassador, I have to. From the age of 10 on, each year, his body began to turn clearer and clearer and clearer, until by the time he was 16 years old, he had turned completely into glass. He'd become hard and stiff as glass, for indeed, for almost 3 months he had sat in his room, in the final stages of turning to glass. And it was those 3 months before anyone even thought, "Oh, where is the prince? No one has seen him for a while." And they went and looked for him, and found in his room a glass statue in his likeness that was indeed, or had been, the prince. And his mother finally realized her folly. She realized that some evil magic must have taken hold while she had her back turned and her face turned towards the affairs of state, or else some unknown power had turned her son to glass. And she took him from his room, and she set this glass statue that had been her son in a garden filled with beautiful roses and butterflies, that he might be surrounded by beauty and peace. She called all of the urban planners and all of the mechanics and all of the people who worked the wizardry of the kingdom, people who could make explosions of fire-breathing dragons in the sky with the use of powders, people who could make machines to tell time and machines to make food and machines to even put on a woman's makeup. There were such ingenious people, and she said, make me something, find me some way that will turn my son from glass back into flesh. And of course, none of them could do it. None of these inventors and machinists could do it. She had architects come and say, build me some pyramid structure that refracts the rays of the light and use the subtle rays of the cosmos to change him back into flesh. And of course, none of them could do it. It was a fool's errand, because lines and geometry and buildings and shapes were not what would turn the glass back into flesh. The queen was absolutely beside herself, and a year had gone by with no one being able to turn the prince back into a prince, and the queen was weeping every day she sat on the throne. Until one day the jester came to her, the old fool. He had been serving the king and the king's father and his father before him since he was 10 years old. He was the fooliest of fools, usually very merry, but quiet when he could see there was reason to be quiet. He knew his perfect timing, he knew all the jests, because he knew how to let go and become silliness itself. He approached the queen and he said, Your Majesty, there is no jibe I can give you that will bring you out of your depths of sadness, and it is right that you are sad you have lost your son. And there is no jibe that will turn your son into anything but glass. But allow me this. Allow me to go into the forest and see if I can't find a solution. None can be found in the palace, in the city, in the nation. Let me go to the wilds. For it is out in the wilds that I learned to improvise and to trust my wit and my intuition and find exactly the right jibe, jest, and word at the right time. I feel sure that if I go into the wild, I will find something that may help. And the queen said, All right, old fool. There is no harm you can do with this fool's errand. Go and find me whatever you find. Maybe you'll find some squirrel with a magic acorn that will turn my son flesh. But do not fear to come back if you don't find anything, for in my sadness I may need you to cheer me up at some point. And so the old fool left with provisions of food and a little roll-up mat to sleep on, and he went out into the forest. And he went looking to see what he might see. And he said, as he approached the forest, he spoke to the trees and the wind and the beasts, at least in spirit, and he said, O forest, you contain the entire world. You were here long before we built our houses of stone and wood. You are primeval. You are that from which all of us came and from which everything we have came. Show me in your multiverse of improvised, synchronized, magnificent, organic happenings. Show me what I need to help the prince return to flesh. And then he entered the forest. He walked and ate his provisions and set up his little camp at night. And he told himself stories. And he played himself music on a little set of pipes he had. And on the third night, he thought he heard rustling. And he thought he could sense that someone was listening to him as he told himself his story and played his music. And so he stopped. And the rustling stopped. And then he continued on with his story, and He made his story be about a battle, and he made it particularly fearsome and exciting. And just at the climax of the battle, he killed the hero in his story. He killed him in a pitiful way. And he swore he could hear leaves shaking, as though someone wept. But he did not hear weeping itself. Whoever it was too stealthy. So the next night, he stopped and he camped, and he thought, I wonder if my visitor is with me still. And he told another story, and this one was a romance. Oh, and he made it beautiful. He made both of the parties of the romance absolutely beautiful, and he made them genuine and sincere, and they poured their hearts to each other, and he made them compatible, not only in what was good, but also in what was difficult in their personalities, and they fit together like fingers fitting in a glove. And right as the story reached the height of its love, one of them he poisoned. With words in his story he poisoned the lover, and they fell dead, and the other, seeing them dead, poisoned themselves and died also, and it became a tragedy. And he swore he heard the leaves rustle, and the sound of weeping going distant. He thought, I was right, someone is enjoying my stories. And the next night, he told a story of joy. He told a story of dance and laughter and joy. He told a story and brought it to such a thrilling, funny, and amusing and delightful conclusion that one had to leap up and dance with joy to celebrate the experience of the story. And he heard the leaves rustle again, and this time, as soon as the leaves seemed to stop rustling, he doused his fire and he went in the direction of the rustling. And after about 5 minutes' walk, he came upon another clearing. And there by another fire, he saw someone dancing and laughing. It was a wild young man, someone of about 16, 17 years of age, a male, dressed in animal skins with the fur of his own body and the shining of his own skin, ruddy skin that had been outdoors for a long time, but still young and fresh and supple and muscular, someone who clearly took after work every day, or somehow their own survival, he guessed, every day, for they had wrapped skins around their feet to protect their feet, and wore a few skins for warmth, though it was a warm night, and the hair was sort of wild and matted with leaves in it. This was someone who lived in the forest. Clearly someone human, someone born to people who lived in houses. This was no wild animal, but a wild man of unknown origin, clearly having lived in the forest for much of his life. And he was dancing and laughing and leaping around the fire with joy. And the old fool took up his pipes and began to play music, softly at first, so that the music crept into the consciousness of the dancing wild man, until the music finally reached a full level, and the wild man was dancing to the music, and the fool then emerged from his hiding place playing the music, and the wild man beheld him and was joyful to know where the music came from, and they danced around the fire together for half the night, until the old fool grew tired and sat down to rest. And the wild man asked the fool who he was and where he came to play such magical music. And the fool told a fourth story, and this time the story of his life. Short, but the story of the kingdom. And then he ended it with the story of the Glass Prince. He told the wild man of his prayer to the forest, and he said, I think you were raised in this place of multiplicity and intuition. Of trusting instinct and imagination with the resources of nature all around you. I can see you've made your life here for some years. And the wild man said, It is true. It is true. I was a child born in houses. I imagine it was on some farm somewhere. I don't know. I do not remember. I still have language and a few of my habits. I know to make shoes for myself, and I know to wrap warm in the winter, but I don't remember much else. But I am moved by your story of these people with broken hearts. And I will come with you, and if there is something that I can do, I will do it. And so the wild man and the fool made the journey back to the kingdom of the Glass Prince. Now, while they were away, something terrible had happened. One night, over the wall that surrounded the rose garden where the queen had set the Glass Prince, came a wicked, wicked troll. And this troll had climbed over the mountain to steal some roses. But he beheld the statue of the Glass Prince, and he was so beautiful, and the moonlight glinted through the glass so charmingly that the troll said, "I will have this pretty bauble for myself," and he grabbed the Glass Prince. And he grabbed the Glass Prince, and he, in his greed, scaled the wall with one hand while holding the statue in the other. And he was giggling to himself, and he said, "I will take this pretty bauble, and I will put flowers on him, and I will kiss it, and I will lick the glass, and I will make little flower offerings, and I will make little hats for it." And not paying attention, and not realizing how smooth the surface of the Glass Prince was, the troll, right at the top of the wall, let slip the statue, let slip the Glass Prince, and the Glass Prince fell onto the stones of the garden path below and shattered. Well, the troll was gone quick as a flash because of the loud noise, and the guards came running. And they saw just the shadow of someone escaping over the wall, and they threw their spears and shot their arrows, but to no avail. And they beheld the horrible sight of the Glass Prince in shards. They went and they roused the queen, who was beside herself, beside herself, beside herself. And the next day the queen called all of the museum keepers and the librarians, all of the scholars, all of the geometrists and the art history teachers, all of the sculptors and the architects, all of the people who invented fabulous machines that could do fabulous things. And she said, all of you, all of you, all of you, the best and the brightest, can you restore my son? And this team of highly intelligent people put their intellects to work. And in fact, they did come up with schemes to put the Glass Prince back together. And the statue was made whole again, all except for the eyes. The eyes of the statue were nowhere to be found. Well, some day or so after this event, the wild man and the fool arrived at the castle. And the queen held a very polite banquet for the wild man, and she took the fool aside and said, "Who is this completely uncivilized wretch that you have brought to my castle, and what good have you seen in bringing him here?" And the fool said, "Your Majesty, I told you it was my intuition that would bring me the solution, and here I have found this miraculous person, this unexpected being in the middle of the forest filled with wild animals. This person has lived by his own wits in the middle of the savage wildness of the forest. Clearly, this must be some remarkable instance where this man has existed for us to find at this time and for some great purpose." And the queen said, "I will trust you, old fool, I will trust you. I have nothing else to lose. My son is already in great peril as it is. I will try anything to turn him back to flesh." And she explained what had happened to the fool and the wild man, and she took them outside after the banquet to see the Glass Prince. And the wild man knelt down, for he had never seen glass to begin with. There's not much glass in the forest. He had never seen the clarity of water solidified and still. He had never seen the moonlight glinting through glass. and he had never seen the sensitive young prince. And he touched the prince's face, and his beautiful features, and the soft expression on his face of melancholy sadness moved the wild man to tears. He said, clearly this person was heartbroken when they became glass. And now their eyes are gone. I would see the eyes back in his head, for I would see the gaze, as sad as it might be. This sadness came right from his broken heart. It is pure, and therefore, even though sad, it is beautiful, and I would see it. And the queen, holding back her own tears at this moving observation, she said, I will give you whatever you need. You go and you find the eyes of my son's statue. And after that, you may travel as far or near as you please, and I will give you what you need to travel, but find a solution to turn my son back into flesh. And so the wild man had the queen make him a new bow and a quiver of very fine arrows. He had a new leather jerkin made and some leather pants, for he did not want to go through the woods and into unknown parts and scrape himself up. And so he set out with his new outfit, and his freshly combed hair, for the ladies of the court would not leave him alone until he had turned his black locks into black silk, all combed and laced in the right direction. And he set out back into the forest, tracking where he believed the troll had gone. And he followed a trail of broken twigs and misplaced leaves, and he asked the rabbits if they had seen someone lumbering through the forest, drunk on greed, and the rabbits answered him back, and in fact, in a short time, the wild man had come upon a cave, and there outside the cave was a troll, and he was gyrating, pleasing himself with a little rhyme about his own greed. I have taken from farmers and kings, and young and old. I have taken their copper, their silver, and their gold. I will take all that is shiny and pretty, whether it be from ocean, from farm, or from city. And the wild man thought that this must be the troll that had tried to steal the glass prince. And he stepped out from the clearing and he said, Aha! I have you. Give me the eyes of the glass prince. And the troll said, Ha! Never! I'll make you dinner before I give you a twig off the floor of my cave. And he disappeared into his cave, which was very dark, pitch black. And he said, Follow me if you will. You can never catch me, for I am hiding depths of darkness in my cave. And the wild man stood at the mouth of the cave, and he realized that in the dark, the troll would have the advantage. He was probably used to seeing in the dark and would probably leap out of him and gnaw the flesh off of his bones. And so he took an arrow. From his quiver, and he notched his bow. And he said, Troll, can you tell me what is the ugliest thing in the forest? And the troll said, Nothing, for he did not wish to give away his position. And the wild man said, Troll, can you tell me what is the most romantic thing in the forest? And the troll said, Nothing. Too smart to give away his position. And then the wild man said, Troll, do you know what the handsomest thing in the forest is? And the troll, whose greed and vanity was limitless, replied, Me! And the wild man shot his arrow, and it struck the troll, for he had aimed right at the troll's voice, and it struck the troll dead. And the wild man then lit a fire in the opening of the cave that threw light around the entire cave that had been pitch dark. And he went and he rummaged through and he found all sorts of copper and silver and gold, but these he left. They were not important. But there, on the pillow of the troll's little dirty, mossy, matted sleeping place, he saw the eyes, the glass eyes of the Glass Prince, and he took them and he put them in a velvet pouch inside his jerkin, and he made his way back to the castle. And there, with the queen beside him, and the fool watching, he placed the glass eyes back in the head of the Glass Prince, hoping that the death of the troll and the magic of the returning of the eyes would somehow make the glass back to life. And the moonlight shone, and the moonlight hit the eyes of the Glass Prince. But he stayed glass. It was not the light of his eyes that would turn him back to flesh. The wild man then said to the queen, I'm going far. I may not ever come back, for I will only return if I can do it with the secret to turning the Glass Prince back into flesh. And the wild man rode out on a horse that the queen had given him. And there by the gates of the city was an old wanderer, an old tinkerer with long, long dreads that had been wound into a bun and tied on top of his head, and a staff with a crescent moon up at the top of the staff, and a little two-sided drum hanging off of his staff. And the wanderer said, You are going on a long and important journey, aren't you? I have a gift for you. And the wild man said, What is your gift for me, wanderer? And why would you give it to me? We have not met. And the wanderer said, We have not met, but I know of you. I know of the man who lived in the forest as a child. And I understand if you are riding a horse and no longer in the forest, that you must have some great accomplishment to achieve, and I would help you. And he gave him a flask, and he said, These are the waters of clarity. I have taken them from the purest spring on the highest mountain. The snow that melted to make the water of this spring has never touched anything but sky and this spring. Pour a drop of this on each eye, and you will see what is true. And may this be a boon to you on your journey. And so the wild man took the flask, and he rode off. After 5 days, he came through a thicket with briars growing over boulders, and there was a black tower in the middle of the thicket. And he rode up to the black tower, and there in the doorway was an old woman, dressed all in black. And he said, Oh, mistress, who are you? And she said, I am the witch of the black tower. Won't you come in? I have something for you. You must be weary. I will feed you. And he entered her tower. And she opened a door, and there, behind the door, he saw an enormous banquet table laden with all of the most wonderful, gorgeous, beautiful foods that you could ever possibly want to eat. And on either side were all these noblemen and women in the finest of clothing, eating and enjoying this banquet, and laughing and enjoying these supple golden wines, and these freshly baked goods, and these crisp vegetables and fruits with dew still clinging to their skins. And he thought, oh, this is delicious. I will. And then he thought, I did not see any horses or carriages that would have carried these noble people to this woman's tower. I'm not sure what's going on here. I'd better check. And he poured a drop from his flask on each eye, and he blinked a few times, and the scene shifted. And what he saw now was that all of the noblemen and women were in clothes that were stained and soiled with food They had been eating like they had been eating for years and years, and the food had gone everywhere, and no one had cleaned them. And they looked tired and haggard and gluttonous and ruined, and they ate with a kind of stupefied, dumb expression, just piling food into their mouths without any appreciation or even acknowledgement of the fact that they were still eating. And there, around their ankles under the table, he saw heavy iron chains, and the black iron chains ran from their feet to the legs of the table. They could not leave, they could not move, they were chained to their own gluttony. And he turned and he said, "You have done this, you have imprisoned these people." And she said, "It is true, I am the Black Witch, but I did not imprison them. I merely gave them what they wanted, and they have imprisoned themselves." And she laughed and laughed, and the wild man left. He got on his horse and he rode away. And after 5 more days, the wild man happened upon a great forest fire that seemed to burn without ever advancing or retreating, as though it were just eternally burning. And there was a path through it that was clear, free of embers and flames, and he rode through it, and he saw a great chateau, a beautiful castle, and it was made all from stone of red, like jasper. And there was a woman at the door with wild red hair, curly and waving, and she wore robes with pointed shoulders and draping and flowing around her all of scarlet. And she said, "Come, come, young man, you have ridden a long way, I can see, and you need to come and just enjoy yourself for some time." And she let him into the palace, and she opened a door, and there was a great garden, and it was filled with poppies, and filled with Japanese maple trees, so that there was a kind of obstacle course. And running around this obstacle course were noble men and noble women, dressed all in beautiful golden robes and silver gowns. And they were playing games with each other. They were playing tag, and they were playing freeze tag, and they were chasing after each other and laughing and laughing. And she said, "Come and join us and be mirthful." And he would see that some of them would catch each other and exchange a kiss and then run on. And women would chase after men, and men would chase after women, and the games would go on and on and on. And he thought, "Oh, this will be fun. I will make so many new friends. Ooh, who knows, I may even fall in love." And then he thought, "There's a forest on fire out of here. Who would travel through a forest on fire just to play games? And I see no horses or carriages that brought these noble people here. Something is amiss." And he took his flask and he poured a drop on each eye. And the scene shifted, and he beheld that all of these men and women's fine clothing were actually torn apart, as though they had been clawing at each other and ripping at each other. And he saw the people running after each other, and some of them were in a fury of lust, and some of them were furious and angry, and some would catch each other and they would beat each other senseless, and then one would escape and run on, and the other one would scream and cackle and chase after them in some twisted thrall of lust and anger and mania. They were maniacs running after each other, and someone who had just chased someone else and ripped at their hair and clothes would then be turned upon and beat their face and scream and run in the other direction, and then their former victim would become their aggressor, and this would go on, and he looked on in horror, and he said, "You are a witch, and you have bewitched these people and imprisoned them." And she said, "Oh, it is true. Oh, I am the Red Witch of the Jasper Chateau. But I only invited these people to entertain themselves. They have imprisoned themselves. They are the ones who refuse to leave." And she laughed and laughed and laughed as though it were some great joke. And the wild man left immediately, and he ran on. He rode on, very hungry and very tired, for 5 more days. And he came upon a quiet lake. And there was a sandbar that he could just ride across the lake to an island in the middle, where there was an alabaster temple with curved domes that sort of shaped up into pointed spires, with long white flags waving like serpents in the breeze, and gentle white flowers all about, swaying gently, gently. And he thought, let us see, let us see. And he went to the White Palace, and there at the doorway of the White Temple was a woman with long white hair that sort of flowed in the breeze softly, and long white, very plain, very simple, but very beautifully draping white garments. And she said, "Welcome, man of the wild. I am the White Witch. You have met 2 of my colleagues. Come now and rest in the White Temple. I have no tricks for you here. Everything is here for you to see and know as you will. I am here to give you rest and comfort." And so the wild man entered, and he looked around, and he saw nothing. Everything was quiet and simple. So he was shown to a room, and it was a very plain room, but with a very soft bed and a white blanket. And he lay down on the bed, and he had himself a very sweet rest, a very sweet sleep. And then he woke, and he went to leave the bed, and he went to leave the room. But something pulled him back to the bed. Some urge inside said, "No, no, 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 just rest, just rest." And so he lay down and he slept again. And when he awoke the next time, he got up and he thought, well, let me go and see if there's any food about. And as he went to the door, something inside of him tugged and said, "No, no, no, no. Let's just look out the window and maybe sit down and rest a little bit." And so he did, for it had been a long journey. But when he got up again, and for the 3rd time tried to leave, but had the same feeling inside compelling him to, "No, no, no, just be quiet, just rest, stay, stay," he thought to himself, "This is odd. I came with an intention for a very important task that meant the world not only to me, but to other people. I hold the joy and contentment of other people's lives in my intention. Why would I stay and rest? What is this urge that I didn't have before?" And he took out his flask and he put 2 drops of water on each eye. And not much shifted, except he beheld a golden thread that was tied around his torso at one end and tied to the foot of the white bed at the other. Well, he took out one of his arrowheads from his quiver, and he used the sharp edge of the arrowhead and he cut through the golden cord. And he went out of the room, now able to. And he went downstairs, and there was the witch, and he said, "You have done me just as wrong as your colleagues intended in the Black Tower and the Red Chateau. How do you live with yourself, trapping people in this way?" And she said, "I believe my sisters told you our secret. We trap no one. We merely give them what they want, and they trap themselves. But I can see that you have learned something very, very useful. You've learned to see the truth of your situation and to make another choice. I admire that. It means that you are a very special and unique person. And I understand your intention, and I know what you are looking for. And I will tell you that the only way you will accomplish your intention of freeing the Glass Prince from his own prison and returning him to flesh will be for you to tell him the secret of who he really is. And to know that, you will have to know who you really are." And the wild man said, "I know who I am. I'm the boy who was lost in the woods and raised by nature. I am the one who has become himself in leaves and twigs with squirrels and rabbits for friends. That's who I am." But the White Witch said, "No, no, no, no. That is who you think you are. That is who circumstance has said to you that you are. I mean, who you really are. Who you really are. Who you really are." And with that, she went inside the White Temple and closed the door. And the wild man was not sure what she meant. He had always been the wild man, dressed in leaves and dressed in skins and living in the forest. And he thought back to the forest and try to find out. Does she mean I should find out if I had come from some farm or some castle or from some city and who I am? What does she mean, who I really am? He went out and he wandered in no particular direction, contemplating over and over again and asking himself, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And he walked through a blizzard in the mountains, and he walked through scorching heat in a desert, and he walked through dense jungles, and he walked through places with sharp rocks that cut his feet, but always paying no attention to what was around him. He focused on this question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And one day, with his feet bleeding and his skin blistered, he arrived back at the placid lake where the White Temple sat. And he was so thirsty he fell to his knees at the shore of the placid lake, and he looked into the water, just about to scoop some up and drink. And in the water he saw his own reflection. And immediately an idea hit him. There I am. Let me use that special flask and see if it does not help with this vision. And he poured a drop on each eye, and he looked back at his own reflection. And he understood exactly who he was. He saw himself. He saw the lake. He saw the light hitting the lake and bouncing back into his eyes. He saw all these things, and in these things he saw everything and nothing, and understood exactly who he was. And so he went back, after taking a drink. He went back to the kingdom of the Glass Prince. And the queen was amazed to see him, and she fed him, and she gave him new clothes. And the fool hugged his wild man friend, and he said, "Have you found it?" And he said, "I may have found something. Take me to the Glass Prince." And he sat down in the rose garden with the Glass Prince. And it was noon, but he did not speak a word. He just sat looking at the Glass Prince, and looking into his eyes, and imbibing the melancholy. And evening came, and then night came, and the moon rose in the sky, and it was a thin crescent. And he took out the flask, and he took the remaining last 2 drops of the flask, and he put them on the glass eyes of the Glass Prince. And he said, "Look at me, beautiful shining one, look at me. I see your sadness, but I also see that you are sad because you love. Inside the spark of your sadness is that love. Can you see that love? And can you see the love that it grew out of? The love that has no object, no name, but is pure. Can you look through the crack of your broken heart and see the purest of loves there within? This is you." And he lay his head down on some moss at the feet of the Glass Prince, and went to sleep. The next morning, the wise old fool stuck his head around the corner of the doorway, and gasped. And then he ran to the queen's bedroom, and he said, "Majesty, Majesty, Majesty, come and see, come and see, come and see. You started on a fool's errand. It brought you something wild, and in your wildest dreams did you imagine, come and see." And the fool and the queen rushed to the rose garden, where they found a beautiful, beautiful young prince sleeping in the arms of a wild man with jet black silk hair. And the palace rejoiced, and the nation rejoiced, and everyone learned the lesson to value love above all things. That while one does one's duty, one remembers to love. And while one deals with one's circumstances, one remembers love. And even when one has a broken heart, one looks inside of it to see love.